In this video, I'm going to be talking about macros and their inseparable partners, the control nodes. I'm going to be using a very simple JSFX here to demonstrate the basic functionality of macros. And this should work just exactly the same way with any compatible effect that you will connect or try to connect to MiniMacroMaker. Let's start by creating a macro. I can do this by going to the canvas here and right click it. I'll have a couple of options here, but let's start with creating and adding a macro. In order to talk about macro, we'll need to see the other nodes as well and the relationship between them. So I will connect a parameter to this macro. I'll click the map button, which will start this flickering effect, which indicates that if I move anything, a compatible effect, it will connect to this macro. So I'm going to move this slider right here. You'll see the connection created, and I'll connect something else as well, giving us two parameters being connected and controlled by this macro. If I want to stop this, I will simply have to click again on the map button and it will stop flickering. Make sure you do that before you start using and interacting with your macro. All right, now that we have a few things connected here to the macro, we can talk about the nodes. We'll take it left to right, talk about macros, talk about controls, and wrap it up with the parameter nodes. So we got a couple of buttons here. First of all, this little dot represents the theme. So if I click it, I'll get a drop down with different themes, and selecting them will change the theme for the node I selected and for any children nodes connected to it. So if I make a couple of gaps here, you can see the connections. So when I change a macro's color, it will change all of its children's color. So I can change this control node's color and it will affect only the node connected to it. So nice way to keep your graph color coded and organized. Let's look at this a bit more closely and look at the other buttons. After our map and theme, we have the knob itself. This will set the value of the macro between 0 to 1 and allow you to modulate connected parameters. You can double click to insert a specific value or double click this to change the name, let's say EQ, because it's connected to NQ right now. Next, we have this MIDI button. You can control the macro using your MIDI surfaces and MIDI controllers. I'll go more in depth into this in a specific video talking about that. Also, I'll go more in depth into automation in a different video, but just for now, as you can see, if I click this, I'll get a drop down with different automation modes. This will set the automation mode, which I can record automation for this macro, but again, I'll go more in depth into that in a separate video. So that's pretty much the basics of our macros. Moving on to control nodes. Once I am connected to a parameter with my macro, it has to go through a control node in order to turn this information I'm sending from my macro into something that can control my parameters. So how do they work and what buttons do we have here? First of all, most important slider we have is depth. So similar to how Serum, Vital, Phase Plant do their modulation, I can move my parameter and set the base value of it. And if I'll move the screen over here, you can see that when I move my parameter from this area, it will directly affect the parameter in the effect, and vice versa. They're interconnected this way. So I set my base value through this parameter knob, and I set the modulation depth using this slider. So the blue arc or the colored arc represents the depth of my modulation, the maximum depth, and the white arc that moves around represents the current location of my macro while modulating. So this will give me a nice and clear indication of what sort of modulation I'm doing, and I can adjust it using this depth slider, either above the parameter's value or below it. That's one. Let's move on to this curve. I can control the modulation curve in which I move this parameter. So this way I will do very slow modulation at first and very rapid modulation near the end of my macros range. And the other way around, I'll do very quick modulation on the start of my macros movement and very slow on its end, or just go linear in the middle as it starts and the default value. Let's talk about these buttons. Bypass, just I can momentarily neutralize the effect of this control node if I want to hear the effect without this parameter being modulated, and quickly turn it back on. I can switch the direction of my modulation if I like it, but just want a full 180 of it, or flip it back around. And lastly, we have unipolar versus bipolar control. So unipolar will set the base value as the starting or ending point of my modulation, depending on the direction. And bipolar will use my parameters value as the middle of my modulation range, which I can increase or decrease. And once I move my macro around, I can go both above and below my base value using the modulation. So this is bipolar and unipolar modes. It's pretty much everything we have using the control node. And lastly, let's look at the parameter node. A couple of things worth mentioning here. As we said, I can grab the knob and modulate and change the base value of my parameter. I can change the theme, as we've seen before, and I can change the way my values are being displayed. So if I click this, I can see either 1, 2 decimal points, or just flat value, and this will give me either more or less detail depending on what sort of parameter I am modulating right now. Just an option for you to play around with and use as you want to. This button will change the way the arc is displayed. The first option shows the color and modulation range separately with 2 different arcs, and this will give you a cleaner, smaller view of your modulation. This really comes into play when you modulate one parameter using 2 different sources, let's say 2 different macros. So if I create a different macro, or an LFO in a different video, I can create a different macro, go through a different control node, and modulate the same parameter. Now you can see that it's connected to a couple of different sources. Let's change colors to make things a bit clearer. So let's make this macro red. In this, I will make black so we can see things a bit clearly. In this mode, we will always see only one arc representing the range of our modulation. When we hover over a certain control node, we can see its control range being displayed in color on the parameter itself, so we can understand what sort of range we're creating using each of the nodes. So this is one way to see things, and the other way to do it will be the multi-arc mode. This is all about your preference and how you want to see things. So as you can see in this mode, the arcs are fully separated. You can see them stack up on each other. The red one represents this control node and the blue one represents the top one. And of course, just like before, the white arc represents the range, the current location in the range modulation of our macro's position. So this is about how you like to view your modulation. Before wrapping up this video, I want to talk about working with the graph itself, cables, and a couple of options here that we have in the right-click creation menu. So first off, any blue point can connect to any blue point, any red point can connect to any red point, but any blue point trying to connect to any red point will have to go through a control module. So I can use this macro through 2 control nodes to do modulation on 2 parameters. I can do it with 1 control node. If I select and press the delete button, I will delete a node, and I can just stretch this cable and modulate both of these parameters using the same control node. So this is just like a general tip so you can understand the flow in Mini Macro Maker a bit better. If you want to disconnect a cable, you can alt-click it, alt-left-click it, and it will delete the cable, and you can reconnect things the same way or a different way, whatever works for you. Also worth mentioning, you can manually create the nodes not only through the mapping mode, so I can right click and create a new control node and then reconnect it in any way I see fit. And also, lastly, in this menu, we have the last touched option, which will bring in to Mini Macro Maker the last parameter I touched in the effect, as long as it's being able to be identified and mentioned here as a last touch parameter. If I move it and right click here, select last touch, I'll get a parameter node for this parameter. You can go ahead and do it for a couple of different effects, and even if you don't want to do any modulation at all, you'll be able to just collect your different parameters in here. You can give them colors and just use Mini Macro Maker as a sort of mixing desk for your different section and a project, and control and test out your effects and parameters from here. So there are all sorts of different ways to use Mini Macro Maker to its full effect. Lastly, as you can see here on the top, there are a couple of different hotkeys you can use. The one I want to talk about is the flow hotkey, so F. If things get a little cluttered and I get a lot of nodes in the graph and I want to understand what's connected to what, even when things are close to each other, I can use the F key when selecting a specific node. This will highlight the nodes connected to it and will give us a nice little animation on the cable just to make it easily visible what's connected to what. This will also work when things are right next to each other. And in this mode, we can click the toggle edges on top button to get a clearer and easier understanding. We'll get a little animation for our cable right here. And mainly we'll get these highlights to push forward what nodes are connected to what and make it easier for us to understand what things are connected to what, while still being able to use Mini Macro Maker in this grid view and keep things compact and aligned without having too much trouble working around that. So that's it for covering the macro and control nodes. For other components and parts of Mini Macro Maker, I will see you in the next videos.